the funny thing about it is he measured the fields for a full day, and I think just before sunrise, it was the highest point where he got unimaginably high readings. He was using it for corn seed growth, and he got huge stalks of corn. What I think he didn't understand is that they were using this energy in another way. If you read Carlos Barrero's book, The Book of Destiny, at one time, and this is a mind blower, he states through the elders that, and this is thousands of years ago, there were 55,000 pyramids from Yucatan to Guatemala actively pumping energy in the atmosphere. We don't know what they were doing with this energy. Uh, Today, there's only 5,000 active. Unfortunately, Barreros died in the COVID plague, as well as a number of other friends of mine, elders and Native Americans, that just devastated the Native population. But uh, getting back to Burke, he has been able to track and show that the ancients understood these telluric energy fields in ways that we don't understand. They were tuning forks. Their physicality was a tuning fork to understand, to feel the energy and know where the high points were and where the low points were.
Something that was really interesting to me about what they wrote about in Seeds of Knowledge was that they went to multiple pyramids in Tikal, and there was only one of the pyramids that had this astonishing effect. And
Right.
they proposed that it had to do with the age of the pyramids, where the Lost World Pyramid was the oldest one,
The
and
oldest.
the newer ones were built in emulation of the old one without any of the underlying knowledge of what actually made it a significant structure.
Like the people who practiced the electrical harnessing were a previous civilization, and maybe I don't know what they're called, Tikalis, the early Mayans, right? Tikal is supposed to be one of the earliest Mayan cities.
I call them
They
pre-Maya, or the first ones.
right on, yeah.
Yeah.
So the pre Mayans, they were the ones who had the idea for it, I guess, and then the Mayans came along and were like, oh, that's a cool looking pyramid. Let's build some of those too.
Yeah.
And so it might not be any surprise that we don't have the original architecture even of these structures that were best able to harness uh, these energy flows, for
I
lack of a
think
better
there's
word.
also two earlier pyramids within that final pyramid that they tested. And we don't know the age, but conventional archaeologists tend to think that they're 3,000 years old. It's because they're using dating. It's crazy what they use. They'll use some organic material around the base of a pyramid, and that'll
Right.
be the date that they'll come up with without thinking of looking interior at the interior of this place where this
Well, you
pyramid
can't
where
tell
the
the age of a rock, right? I mean, you can tell the age of a rock for when it was formed, maybe, using radiometric, but you can't actually tell when it was harnessed for a structure. It's just,
oh
it's next to impossible.
You
So,
you
yeah.
might be able to use some kind of lichen growth. Like there was a really interesting paper. So I used to give tours in the Columbia Gorge, and so tell the story of the Missoula floods and everything that happened.
That's a cool story.
It's a really, really cool story, and we live in an area in Southern Oregon where it seems like there's also a similar story to be told like that, but nobody's told it yet. Because we
Yeah.
wander around, and I'm like, this is a floodplain, and you look into the history, and everybody's just like, hmm.
there's like sand on the hilltops and
Yeah.
stuff. It's very strange.
Yeah, but there's a mountain in the gorge. I think it's called Dog Mountain or something like that, where the entire face of it came down during a huge earthquake, right? One of the Cascadia subduction events. And for a long time, people were trying to figure out when it happened. And so they were looking at all of these old texts and they were trying to reconstruct it from that. And then they were trying to reconstruct it from, the radiocarbon dating of trees that had died. And this one guy came along and he basically proposed using lichens. It was
Hmm.
like lichens have a specific rate of growth, and that rate of growth can be used to extrapolate how new the rock face is. And so he went through and he cataloged all of the size of the lichens on the new rocks versus the old rocks, and he came up with a date that ended up being 10 years away from what they ended up finding in the records of Japan
Oh,
having a
that's very
tsunami.
cool.
But if it's like 100,000 years old, like it's just gonna be a pile of dust in the center.
That's true.
That's more
That's
like
true.
what. Yeah, we've had a couple times on the show now. I don't think we've released the second one, but Mario Bildrups, who has this really interesting theory of the orientation of ancient structures with respect to a shifting North Pole, and he brought to our attention one of my favorite new facts, which is just that we're often taught in school that, first was the Stone Age, which was maybe, a few tens of thousands of years ago. Then was the Bronze Age, and then was the Iron Age, and now we have the internet. And
A
that's a cool story. That's a cool story.
a
That's a cool
direct
story.
and clear line.
But Mario pointed out, and I just love this because I put it in front of NASA people. I put it in front of a lot of people, right? And it's a really good point. He's like, hey, actually, if you look at how long iron survives, it's about as long as from now to the Iron Age. And if you look at how long bronze survives, it's about from now to the bronze and the stone as well, right? So, of course, any place you look, let's assume just for fun that there was an ancient civilization 100,000 years ago. Well, the only thing that's going to be left is going to be stone. So of
Yeah.
course, like big mounds of dust, are maybe this. Even if you go and look at Manhattan, what's it going to be if we just walk away for 100,000 years? It's going to be
Yeah.
mounds of dust, right? There's not going to be any iron. There's not going to be any plastic. There's not going to
Yeah.
be any bronze, right? It's going to be a Stone Age mound.
You have to wonder if the ancients who built these megalithic temples that are granite knew that, because granite's not going to disintegrate after thousands of years. It's rock, hard rock. But I mean, these guys built with such elegance. It's like, what do they know that we don't know? But they know a lot. That's the bottom line. So
There's something to be said about the ability to harness huge armies of slave labor to produce buildings like that, right? Like granite is a labor-intensive building material that requires you to have a lot of people that you can basically whip into working on it.
yeah, but you have to understand, you're talking about the dynastics, and that's credit. Those they wrote about using slaves. There's a pre-dynastic period where the biggest blocks apparently were cut, and
Hmm.
some of the largest statuary was carved. And I've spoken and had engineers, one guy specifically who's a NASA engineer, say outright and write about the fact that he believes that the largest Ramsey II sculptures were machined.
Mm.
And he actually detects where the machine starts and stops on the face, on the arms, on the legs. And when you see it on a microscopic level, he's dead on. There's no way it was cut by a chisel or a laser. It was some kind of a high rotating cutting device, some
Like a
kind of a blade.
CNC mill or something.
There's also a bunch of anthropologists who are catching on to the idea that a lot of these, there was a lot of anomalous ancient cultures, including Teotihuacan, that
Yeah.
didn't seem to have the stratification where there was like a slave class and like a ruling class. It actually was a city that sort of looked like a bunch of luxury apartments. There wasn't a palace, there wasn't a slave quarters, but
Yeah.
somehow they have enormous pyramids, right? Some of the biggest ones in our hemisphere.
Yeah.
It's like,
Have you seen Teotihuacan? Did you go?
yeah, I've been there twice. It's pretty
Yeah,
amazing.
I mean, you look at the Sun Pyramid, you're like, how in the heck did they build that?
Right?
Because it's
or did
huge.
they, how many times did they build it? Like how many different civilizations were there even? I mean, those are
Exactly.
impossible questions to answer if you're looking for pieces of cloth, pieces of carbon, even carbon things. If you're looking for metal tools, even, nothing's going to survive for more than a few thousand years.
Yeah.
Other
My
than that big pile of rubble that maybe somebody built another pyramid on top of.
Well, because
Yeah.
they rebuilt Teotihuacan pretty extensively, right? Like, because the pictures of them finding it in I think it was the 1920s when they first stumbled on it, it looks in pretty bad condition. But when you go today, the angles are all clean and everything is put back together. And so do you know the extent to which they rebuilt it?
They took off about 4 or 5 feet of topsoil from top to bottom, which took them years to do. They had to bring a train in there. They would put the dirt and get rid of it, move it on. I think, and I've been there a few times, I think it's been continually occupied for thousands of years and modified. Last October, I had a chance to meet with Dr. Sergio Gomez, who is the one of the directors of the Quetzalcoatl pyramid, and we went underneath the pyramid,
Yeah, I saw his article recently about the
and
tunnels. Yeah.
we actually went and did what he showed in National Geographic. We went to see this tunnel. It was one of the lifetime kinds of visits. But one of the things he brought up, which was amazing, was that in this tunnel was huge volumes of mercury. Number one.
Hmm.
Number two, there was a strange smelling, exotic perfume like gas that kept coming through.
Hmm.
And at the very end, where the tunnel terminates, there's two smaller side tunnels that kind of make a T. There was an electromagnetic anomaly that would shut their cameras off, shut their walkie-talkies off, shut all lights off for long periods of time. I mean, their batteries on their walkie-talkies were drained within a few minutes.
Whoa.
And the thing that, and this is a wonderful guy. Gomez is a good person, but he didn't seem to care about the chemical release that had a perfume smell, and this strange anomaly of electricity being sucked out wasn't a concern of his either. And I asked him, well, "Did you have a chemist come down and check this out?" No. Did you use any kind of device to measure the electromagnetic fields down there? No.